Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Wednesday, August 27th. I was just double checking the date there. Today, we've got a really great show planned for you, stretching all of our tech muscles today. We are talking about sports media rights with the CEO of Overtime. We're talking about software multiples with the man behind the popular Clouded Judgment newsletter. We've also got a great conversation talking about the booming business of data storage. But before we get going, I want to remind you very quickly that prices for our AI Agenda Live Summit in New York City go up next week. This is our big AI conference. We've got speakers from Anthropic. We've got big name venture capitalists like Sarah Guo from Conviction coming to join us. Be sure to grab those tickets now. We will put the link in the show notes. Okay, let's get to our first guest. Sports media is an industry that is quickly being reinvented in front of our very eyes. Over the past few weeks, we've seen a number of legacy media and entertainment companies increasingly snapping up new sports rights and sports media properties. I want to bring on someone who follows this space very closely. Dan Porter is the CEO at Overtime. Dan, it is great to have you. Welcome to TITV.
Thanks for having me, Akash.
So, look, this is kind of an interesting time for sports media right now because, you've got the older television companies, which are kind of in some turmoil. You've got the big tech companies that are increasingly moving into sports media. Things are changing so quickly by the quarter, by the year. The question I want to start with is, where do you see the business of sports media rights going 5 years from now?
One of the interesting things is that sports media rights are long-term deals. And, having worked with a lot of leaders of big leagues, they love to lock in 10-year, 11-year deals, which makes a lot of sense because it mitigates against risk and against the future. But what it also means is that rights only come up so often. So you only have so many opportunities to make a deal. So if you kind of map out the whole table, the NBA has just done their deal. The NFL has a couple of years. It becomes almost like a feeding frenzy because there's a limited amount. NBC is locked in the Olympics way into the future. I'll be on Social Security by the time that's done. And so I think that what it does is it's like a great VC deal, right? Like it's a feeding frenzy around that. And the legacy media companies are worried about the tech companies. Tech companies are really worried about the legacy media companies, but they want to be at a place where there's live, unscripted entertainment with passionate fandom.
Yeah, I want to talk about the tech companies. One thing that I've been thinking about is these deals are long, like you said. Isn't there? I know that they want stability, and I know it's in their best interest to get a long-term deal in place. But isn't there something to be said too that if you make it shorter, then you have sort of a better idea of which platform, which channel might actually be the best for your own league? Isn't there an argument to be made there?
There's absolutely an argument to be made there. It's just in the DNA of professional leagues to lock it in. And at the end of the day, you remember, like, a league is an entity, a league is a representation of owners.
Right.
And that's part of what values sports teams. That's why people sell before rights deals and hold after rights deals and so forth. And so in a way, I think they prioritize stability of essentially contractually obligated income or revenue over the fact that they're constantly making deals.
Right. So let's talk about the tech companies. We've seen all of Amazon, Netflix, and Apple getting into this space. Amazon and Netflix it's an advertising play for them. I sort of see it. Apple is kind of interesting because they're not selling ads, as far as I know, on their sports content or Apple TV, broadly speaking. What do you think Apple's strategy here is with sports rights?
Right. And I would add for Amazon too, it's about increasing the value of Prime as well as advertising. I think that, Apple clearly cares about being in the services business. Apple is like, Apple's like the designated hitter. You put them in and they bat once and they try to hit a home run. Like you can go and look on the platform. The catalog is not deep. And so I just think they want to play a different game. They want a level of control and they want to take a much smaller amount of shots. If you kind of break them all down, you look at Netflix, I think they really care about live events, not sports leagues. They want the Golden Globes of sports, right? They just bought the Home Run Derby, but they didn't buy MLB rights. You look at Amazon and they're trying to have regular usage to increase the value of Prime. And I'm not sure 100% that Apple doesn't change their mind every 6 months about what they want and how to fit into that ecosystem, which is fair.
Right, right. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is what young people are watching nowadays as it relates to sports. I mean, we can put aside the discussion about which sport is most interesting. I like hockey. I don't like baseball, but that's just me. I mean, where are you seeing younger audiences gravitate to in terms of sports or in terms of content? You live at the center of this new age of sports content with overtime. How do you think about that?
I mean, listen, hats off to all the professional sports leagues. They're all incredible. The average age of the viewer is 40s, 50s, some of them even 60s. And this idea that we're just waiting for young people to hop on the couch and turn on the TV and watch a 3-hour live game, it's just never going to happen. It's just not the operating system of young people. And so I think that there's an interest. I always used to say when we were selling overtime, it's like more people talk about Tom Brady or LeBron James and sit down and watch Tom Brady or LeBron James. And it's about, it's about live viewing. It's about the competition that exists from Roblox and Fortnite and Netflix and all of those other things. I mean, I think when we were all kids, we had a way finite amount of stuff that we could participate in. And listen, everything that I just described to you is about participation and about being social with other people. And I think a live sports event is a great example of that.
Right.
Go, the person next to you is screaming. It's incredible. Less than 5% of Americans have been to a live sports event. And so I think that those are challenges, but young people's attention is more varied, number one. Number two, clearly they're using social to keep up to date without watching the live game. And I think the biggest challenge is there are a lot of fans, but are they customers? And that's the threshold that I have to think about and that every single pro sports league has to think about.
Right. Last question I wanted to ask you is ESPN came out with some news that they're pushing out this new revitalized app as part of the big announcements that came in recent weeks. One of the things I've been thinking about is how a business like you thinks about ESPN moving more into that space, because for me, I mean, it's a new app. I wondered if you think of it as competition to the content that you produce at Overtime, or how do you think about that?
Listen, in my previous life, I made a mobile game that was downloaded 250 million times. I love apps. I want to make the most popular app in the world. I just recognize that my audience uses apps. They're called Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And it's just very, very hard to change that usage. So when I talk to young people, I'm like, are you on the ESPN app, the Bleacher app, Report app? They don't, that's not what they use. I mean, 90% of Gen Z gets their actual news, their restaurant reviews, their sports news from TikTok and Instagram. And I think, what do they teach you in business? Switching costs. Like, it's very hard to get people to change their behavior. On the flip side, it's way easier to make money on your own platform than it is on someone else's platform. So I think it's a big challenge. And I think, hats off to ESPN for trying it, and they're using AI and they're trying to personalize it. But at the end of the day, even I, an old man, I'm making some of my fantasy football picks based on people I watch on TikTok, not based on websites I use.
Great. And you talked about fantasy football very quickly. This is a bit of a stretch here, but sports betting, an area that has intrigued me. Any interest in Overtime moving into that space at all?
Honestly, no. I think for a couple reasons. One is I have no problem with sports betting. I think that most sports bettors lose money, and I think for what I care about personally, and I want to spend my time on and building a brand, I think we just occupy a different space. I think
Right.
number two is it's very focused on lead gen, and when you're in the digital and the video space, less so. I think that prediction markets are clearly super, super interesting. I mean, I was talking to young people who made tens of thousands of dollars on the New York mayor's race. So I think you can't ignore that to some extent. But I think for us and our fans and our brand, fantasy, which is non-monetary, but allows you to feel like you're part of the action, is a good spot for us. I think sports betting is probably a better spot for somebody who's, audience can afford to lose more money or so forth. But listen, it's a free country. Happy for them. I'm happy for people to spend their money however they want to.
Right. Well, Dan, thanks for coming on the show. It's a very interesting and exciting time for sports, and we've obviously got a number of these leagues kicking off, and let's just hope that my beloved Toronto Maple Leafs make something happen this year.
Good luck
Although
to you
I'm
and them.
hesitant. That's Dan Porter, the CEO of Overtime. Well, it is software earnings season, which means there's going to be a lot of movement across public tech companies. The categories in focus right now, though, are the wonderful industries of cybersecurity, data services, customer relationship management, all the fun stuff. I want to bring on someone to the show who follows almost all those companies very closely to talk about his market analysis more broadly. Jamin Ball is a partner at Altimeter Capital. It is his first time on the show. Jamin, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited
So
to chat.
I want to bring up a chart that we've been talking about numbers in the background here. Let's pull up this chart here that you produced here, which is very interesting to me. It looks at the median next 12-month revenue multiples to the median next 12-month growth rates for SaaS companies. Look, we've got two lines here. The thing that I want to get you to explain to us is why it is that growth rates are coming down, but multiples are staying the same. That sort of seemed counterintuitive to me. Talk about that for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things on the chart. One, you can kind of tell the multiple and growth rate chart lag each other, and maybe just some context as well. What this is showing is NTM stands for next 12 months, and so it's the median next 12-month growth rate of a universe of public software companies. There's about 80 in the list, which it's not an exhaustive list, but it's decently representative of the entire software world. And I think what you're seeing is you kind of saw the early. I mean, the chart shows an interesting story, right? We had the onset of COVID, right? The very early days where we thought the world was falling off a cliff and estimates all came down. We had the ZERP period where estimates all went way up as kind of software more broadly benefited from just less scrutiny on buying and an easier environment. And then over time, I'd say you'd seen a natural deceleration, maybe a quicker deceleration early on as we went through the 2022, 2023 period of rising rates and just a tougher period of selling. And we've kind of leveled out now. I think the median growth rate's about 11, 12%. The median multiple is about 5 times. And that's held constant. I'd say the overlay and maybe why has multiple stayed constant as growth rate is decelerated is, a revenue multiple. There's many different ways to value public companies. I'd say ground truth is let's look at the present value of all future free cash flows, right? A DCF.
Right.
A revenue multiple is it's a very crude estimation that will weigh many different variables: growth rate, margin profile, profitability, all wrapped up into a simple revenue multiple, right? It's why two companies growing the exact same rate might have different revenue multiples because they have different profitabilities or different TAMs or other things. And so I'd say, like, why has multiple stayed constant as growth rate has fallen? I think it's because you've seen across the board the profitability and the free cash flow margin of these companies go up. And so that has kind of balanced out
Equalized it out.
Exactly.
Right. Now, talk about the growth rates, because this is something that I found interesting too. Well, look, we had the boom period in, after the pandemic. We saw a lot of these software companies growing very quickly. That started to taper down a bit. What do you attribute that to? And then the next question I have for you is, do you see it coming up at all? But let's start with the decline first.
Yeah, look, I think that was coming out of the zero interest rate period where there was just heavy scrutiny on every procurement, right? Every CFO was looking at their spend from headcount and people to IT software and was looking for redundancies, was battening down the hatches, was kind of unwinding the period that we had, the period of exuberance, and that made it tough to sell software, right? A lot of software solutions compete with a product from Microsoft, right? Microsoft had this great bundling effect, right? And so large companies wanted to reduce the number of vendors, reduce the complexity, reduce the contracts that they had. And that was I think, right, why you saw a big decline in growth rate for just the public software universe in general.
Right. And I mean, another thing I've been thinking about is that we haven't had as many IPOs. And so
Hmm.
the basket of companies has actually kind of stayed the same over the past couple of
Yeah.
years.
That's right. Usually you'll get about 5 to 10 new software IPO issuances each year. And generally speaking, the companies going public or early on in their life cycle are still growing quite quickly. And you kind of get this balancing of not later stage, more mature public companies that are maybe slower growth but higher profitability get acquired by private equity, and kind of some of the slower growth names drop out of the index, and the higher growth names enter the index, and
Right.
it keeps the overall growth rate. I mean, I think the median on that chart was close to 30%
Yeah.
pre-COVID, right? That it was not in the ZERP period, but pre-COVID, and we just haven't had. I mean, Rubrik and Figma. There have been some in Service Titan. There have been some recent IPOs that
Right.
are higher growth, but we just haven't had many.
We had news this week at the information we reported that OpenAI is increasing the size of its share sale, and it kind of got me thinking about the private markets and that side of this story. How
Mhm.
powerful the private markets have become, and that being sort of a reason that companies don't need to go public. Talk a little bit about how you view the private markets right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've been in venture 10 years, so not a super long time, but also not a short period of time. And I think that the definition of venture capital has changed quite a bit, right? It's not just your Series A, B, or C stage companies where you're buying, 10 to 20%. You have companies doing quite literally billions, or over 10 billion in revenue, staying private, raising rounds that are 10 billion plus,
And
which
they're still a
is
startup. They're
they're
still
still
we still call them startups.
yeah, and so I think we kind of need to evolve like how we think about venture capital. Like we truly have venture capital in the sense of how we used to think about it, earlier stage companies finding product market fit, going through the early days of scaling.
Yeah.
And then you have what we call at Altimeter quasi-public companies, kind of premier growth, like the private Mag 7, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the
So
Databricks, the
right.
Stripes of the world, which everything about them feels like a public company, except for the fact that their securities are not publicly listed.
Right. And one of the things that I've been thinking about are the employees at these quasi-public companies. Their motivations for joining these companies may be slightly different, or they might not have lived up to the motivations, I guess, when they joined. How do you think about how the employees are thinking about this?
Yeah, look, I think one of the beauties of Silicon Valley is, you could join an early stage company, you get a lot of equity. That equity is publicly listed one day and liquid, and you can use that to go buy a new home or change your family's fortune. There is a little bit of a kind of an employee contract, not literal contract, but like a social contract, I would say. I don't want to call it like an issue yet because, again, private markets are evolving. But the longer that capital stays locked up, I do think at some point it will kind of make people question joining earlier stage companies. Well, do I want to do this? Will I be able to? Um, is it worth the risk, right? And again, I think most people joining early stage companies aren't necessarily doing it for the money. They're the missionaries, not the mercenaries. I think the later stage you start to compare. I could have I'm some high level engineer. I could go get $1 million in equity from Facebook, from Netflix, from Microsoft, name your big tech company, and it's liquid, or something that might not be. And I think at some point that will start to weigh. I do think, though, a lot of people joining these companies aren't doing it just for the money. It's the excitement of being part of the forefront of innovation.
Right.
And private markets are evolving, right? You see SpaceX has a pretty regular cadence of doing tenders where employees can sell shares. OpenAI is starting to do the same thing. You see, pretty regular tenders in the news cycles for them. I think other companies are kind of consistently attaching tenders to primary rounds or just independent of primary rounds. And I think that is enabled by the evolution of venture capital markets just getting quite large, right? And they can support
Right.
it. They can go do a multi-billion dollar. It used to be if you wanted to raise a couple $100 million, the only way to do that was in an IPO. And
Yeah.
that was one of the forcing functions to going public, access to a quantum of capital that wasn't available in the private markets. That's totally different now. You could raise, I mean, what was OpenAI's round? $40 billion, right? You could raise tens of billions of
Yeah.
dollars in the private markets, and kind of access to capital has now been totally unlocked. And so you kind of combine all those things,
Yeah.
a little bit of like a loop here. I think employees will be able to get liquid on shares. I think you have, right, this private Mag 7. A lot of these companies are still very founder led. And I think if you were to ask any one of them, well, how are you thinking about going public, right? It could be a good time. The IPO market's opening, the IPO market's shut. How are you thinking about it? I think what they'd all tell you, which is what you'd want to hear, is I don't really care what my company's worth in 2 years, in 3 years.
Yeah.
I'm trying to optimize the value of my company 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And it's, again, you want people taking big bets. You want people thinking long term. You want companies like Databricks to think, how can I become the next Microsoft? Not, how can I go public in the next 2 years and, optimize my value here or there. That being said, I do think being public has a lot of benefits for broad employees, former employees. At the end of the day, having the optionality of selling your shares whenever you want to, without restrictions is a benefit of being public. But
Yeah.
I think private markets will continue to evolve. Secondary markets will continue to evolve. And venture capital as an industry will continue to evolve.
I know we got to come up with a better term for it. I
And
think a more
exactly.
inclusive term, maybe just
Yes.
private
yes,
capital, or at this point,
Yes.
it's just capital, really.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, well, Jamin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. And a big fan of your newsletter as well. That is the Clouded Judgment newsletter. Jamin Ball is a partner at Altimeter Capital. Well, one of the most interesting parts of the AI boom are all of the adjacent industries that have seen businesses flourish. Vast Data is one company that has been a beneficiary of all this, and it has quietly become a data storage darling. I want to bring on Kevin McLaughlin, who wrote an in-depth story about the company today, to explain to us why we should be paying attention to this business. Kevin, welcome to TITV. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Akash. It's great to be here.
So, talk to me about Vast Data. I haven't heard of this company. You wrote the story. Why should I be paying attention to it?
Yeah, Vast Data is one of the more interesting companies to come along in some time. Storage has not been one of the most exciting parts of the enterprise software stack. It's kind of something everyone needs, but has not been super dynamic. I'm sure that the companies in this space might argue that point. But Vast Data has emerged as really one of the leaders in flash storage for training AI models. Its ability to move large amounts of data very quickly has appealed to companies like XAI and Tesla and Pixar. And Vast Data has gained a name for itself by landing some of the industry's largest AI workloads. So they're definitely a company to watch.
And what is it about Vast's technology that makes it better than so many of the other players out there?
Well, one of the things we mentioned in the story is that flash storage is sometimes not economical. Vast has found a way through software to allow companies to sort of, for less critical data, you can use less expensive, lower performance storage. And for the training AI models, you need the high performance flash storage that can move data quickly. So Vast has been able to balance those two worlds very effectively.
Right. I mean, I want to talk about some of the other great stories you've written lately, but, one thing that did intrigue me is sort of, NVIDIA having invested in this particular company. What did you find about what NVIDIA really liked about Vast?
Yeah, Vast has a close relationship with NVIDIA. NVIDIA has also invested in other storage companies like Weka. And of course, NVIDIA as an ecosystem player works with a number of other storage vendors as well.
Right.
I think the thing that we keyed on in the story is that Jensen Huang has been to Vast Data's event last year, I believe it was. There was a quote where he said that he's looking forward to working together with Vast for the next 80 years, which is a pretty long time. So I think that's one of the things that made us think,
Right.
there's a special relationship going on here.
Right. Look, I want to talk about another story that you wrote recently. You had this big scoop that Meta and Google have signed a big cloud deal together. Talk to us a little bit about that deal and really the significance of that $10 billion figure that you scooped.
Yes, when I first heard about this tip, it reminded me of when I worked at a different publication about 8 years ago. I got a tip that Apple had signed a big cloud computing deal with Google Cloud. And I initially was like, there's just no way. There's no way that these rivals are going to work with each other. And on a cloud deal. And the people I spoke with when I started to research that story were also like, no way. But it turned out to be true. And this is another example of how cloud it makes for strange dance partners. I think that Meta needs a lot of compute, but this is more than just raw compute. This is an actual like strategic purchase that they've made. Meta has made from Google Cloud. And when I was doing the reporting, I heard that Google Cloud has put a ton of investment on its side into working with Meta. So this is something to watch, and I imagine there could be more coming down the road.
Right. And, we talked about this deal briefly the day that you published this story with Stephanie Palazzolo, our AI reporter. One of the things I was talking about with her was just how much power Google has amassed in the AI ecosystem. Obviously, it has its model, it has its cloud deals. I mean, it really has become a central figure. I mean, even Meta is relying on it, and they're kind of rivals.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Meta uses Microsoft Azure and AWS as well. So, in some sense, it was kind of they were due to sign up with Google Cloud because a lot of the biggest companies in the world do work with all three major providers.
Right.
But I do think that there's something to be said about Google has not made up a ton of market share on Microsoft and AWS, and yet all you hear about these days is Google's AI and how it's really resonating with customers. And this was always the prediction that a lot of Googlers had years ago was that eventually AI would propel Google into the leading position in the cloud. That's yet to happen in a market share sense, but who knows? We'll have to watch and see.
Kevin, we don't get to have you on the show too often, so I want to ask you some other questions related to your beat. I mean, you've been covering enterprise software at large for I don't know how long it's been, but I know it's been a lot longer than I've actually been in journalism. And so I want to take a step back here. A lot of people on this show talk about the cloud to AI transition as something similar to the on-prem to cloud transition. And I wanted your take on whether or not you see that as an apt analogy, or if you think that might be overstated, or what might be different there.
Yeah, certainly there's some similarities. I would say that the move from private data centers into the cloud was far more traumatic for a lot of companies because I mean, there's just so much work involved with you have to rewrite your applications, you have to in some cases just kind of learn a new pricing model and just all of these things. So I think a lot of companies have already acquired those muscles, and so the transition now to AI is a little bit easier than it would have been, initially in the shift to the cloud years ago. But both transitions do come with a lot of complexity, a lot of adjustment, a lot of education for users. So it's definitely not a trivial thing.
Right. And the other topic that you've written a lot about are the corporate data wars. Companies like Salesforce, for example, blocking access to these AI agent companies from accessing that data. And I wanted to ask you how you see that story playing out potentially, given that you might have observed similar kind of data wars throughout, the decades that you've been covering this sector.
Well, it's actually quite the opposite because when enterprise SaaS took off, 15 years ago or so, the lifeblood of it really was the application programming interfaces that allowed data to flow from one vendor's application to another, and that is basically what enabled, what gave large companies the confidence to make the investments in SaaS, and also just kind of be confident that if they were to sign up with a provider and make the investment that was going to continue to be usable down the road. This is very different. I do feel like this is a case where also reported on, I think kind of just pumping the brakes and taking a pause while they see how everything unfolds. It seems to me, it seems to be more fueled by uncertainty and of course competition in some sense, but the thinking, I think what they're thinking is that let's just take a beat, figure
Right.
things out, because once you expose the data, once you make it available, it's very hard to claw it back.
Right. Right. Well, look, Kevin, you sit at the intersection of a number of interesting stories. Thank you so much for coming on and explaining to us not just the vast story of vast data, but the vast story of enterprise software and AI and cloud. That is Kevin McLaughlin, who covers enterprise software for The Information. Well, that does it for today's show. A reminder, we are live on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I want to thank Amazon Web Services, who was our presenting sponsor for this production. And I want to thank you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your viewership. I am already excited for our next episode tomorrow. And so until then, bye-bye for now.